Climate change is becoming a talking point for 2020 Democrats, but there's a Republican in Congress making sure his party gets into the conversation too. Congressman Garret was named last month to the House's new subcommittee on the climate crisis. The Louisiana lawmaker is the ranking GOP member on the panel. Graves had this to say about his plans to tackle the issue.
I think the challenge is that when you start talking about climate change, that's such a broad topic. And so I think one of the first things we need to do is actually redefine the narrative and what exactly it is that we're talking about, what the threats are that are imminent or at the doorstep versus those that are long-term, and devise strategies for each. I think very clearly what's at the doorstep is the challenges that we're experiencing in regard to sea rise in some of our coastal communities, some of the impacts of storms that we've had in recent years. Just in my home state of Louisiana, we had a 500-year and a 1,000-year storm in 2016 alone. You do the math, I'm either really old or something's wrong. You could look at what happened in 2017, 2018 with some of the hurricane events, Harvey, Irma, Maria, Michael, Florence. We clearly need to be making more proactive investments in addressing the resiliency, the sustainability of our communities, protecting our economy, protecting our ecosystem. That is the threat that is immediate, that is right before us.
A new article out for CBS News Wednesday profiles the Republican as he plays a role in leading his party on climate change. The reporters of that article join me now, CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns and CBSN associate producer Tyler Kendall. Welcome to you both. Really interesting to hear him speak because you have to remind yourself he's a Republican, Tyler. So why is it that Congressman Graves is in a unique position here to be the Republicans' ranking member on the panel?
Right. So one of the reasons why we were so drawn to Congressman Graves in the first place is that Louisiana is a really interesting case study. It's one of the nation's largest exporters of petroleum, but on the flip side, they've seen some really detrimental impacts from the industry, such as the BP oil spill in 2010, severely hurt its wildlife as well as its coastline. It also experiences extreme weather like hurricanes and high coastal flooding, which can lead to erosion. So that really lends Congressman Graves to have this position where he can say, look, I understand the economic impacts that climate change solutions can have on industries like fossil fuel, but at the same time, this is right at our doorstep. So he gave us this really impactful quote, which was that Louisiana has already lost 2,000 square miles of its coastline. If that happened to Rhode Island, there'd only be 49 states today. That really hammers home something else that he was pretty adamant about, which is going out and talking to Americans, talking to people whose backyards are literally being washed away because of global warming, and talk to those scientists. That way we can remove the partisan politics and the politicians really out of the conversation and just focus on the facts. Now I should quickly add that his appointment wasn't without some scrutiny. He's taken about a little over $500,000 from the oil industry. The League of Conservation voters only gave him a 3% rating on their environmental scorecard. But overall, Capitol Hill really applauded the decision by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to appoint him, and many called it savvy.
Well, so the panel met for the first time last week, and it doesn't have any legislative authority, but Caitlin, why is its implementation, the fact that they've actually now formed and they've come together, why is just that act itself so significant?
It is significant because climate change is such an integral part of the conversation. We talk about it a lot in the 2020 race, and these are lawmakers who are arguing that we need to address these issues now. And there was a lot of focus paid on this particular committee because it came out from Nancy Pelosi around the time that the Green New Deal was introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This committee was seen as the one that would kind of address the more practical matters. Some of the lawmakers on this, at least on the Democratic side, are a little more moderate in their approach. You would note that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not on this panel. So this is going to be something to watch. They don't have much legislative authority, but the congressman told us that basically they want to have listening sessions. They want to come up with some policy ideas. You also, though, have criticism from within the Democratic Party that this isn't going to do that much. You've had others saying we're doing other things in other relevant committees, but it's really interesting to hear a Republican talk like this on climate.
It is. Well, Congressman Graves, as I understand it, addressed the partisan nature of this issue of climate change. Let's listen to some of what he said.
I really don't think this has to be a partisan issue. It certainly can devolve to that. I don't think that's in the interest of Americans. I think if we're going to continue making progress and help to make this country safer and more secure, then we need to be working together.
So, I mean, Tyler, how is the debate over climate change as an issue evolving here?
Right, so maybe Democrats haven't monopolized the issue of climate change, but they've definitely capitalized on it much more so than Republicans. Like Caitlin was saying, the Green New Deal really is now serving almost as this litmus test for 2020 Democrats. But when I asked Republicans, is your party doing enough to address climate change and talk about it, a lot of them spoke about the achievements of last Congress when Republicans held both chambers. However, you know, that was last Congress, and when we reflect back, we really don't think about climate change being central to the narrative. But today, progressives are really talking more about it, so it's forcing Republicans to talk about it, whether they like it or not. Another instance is that public sentiment is changing. So last year we saw some really extreme weather, like those devastating hurricanes or the deadly wildfires in California. So CBS News took a poll right after Hurricane Michael in October, and it found that 61% of Americans believe climate change is caused by human activity, and that was 21 percentage points higher than it was in 2011. A conservative strategist I spoke to said Republican lawmakers really noticed upticks like that. So now the debate isn't so much, is climate change real? Now it's, what can we do about it? And that's really where you're going to see these disagreements between Republicans and Democrats. It's what's the viable and tangible way forward to implement some of these solutions.
And Caitlin, we heard the congressman acknowledge that this is a really broad issue to try and tackle here. How do you think this is going to play out as we move into 2020?
Well, a congressman like this is going to be focused on what is achievable at this point, but also keeping in mind that a lot of the resistance to these big, bold changes proposed to something like the Green New Deal and other climate proposals are really disruptive. And that concerns a lot of people who are very focused on their districts and what it would mean to industry in their areas. So this is such a difficult issue to address, and a lot of people argue you can't do it in a big way. But as Tyler mentioned, with the public sentiment changing on this and putting more of a focus on what we should do now, there are lawmakers like this that feel there are things that they can address, at least in the short term. But there's such a big difference between the parties on this still. Just because one congressman is talking about this doesn't mean that many in his party aren't resistant to a lot of the changes. And we've seen in the 2020 campaign that a lot of them are attacking things like the Green New Deal. So in a really important sticking point, but highlighting where there could potentially be common ground.
Yeah, very fascinating to hear this voice on climate change from a Republican. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Tyler Kendall, thanks to you both.